Good evening, everybody. Just going to take a moment while lots of people are joining us this evening, but if you'd like to, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. We've got people dialing in from all across Australia and in fact some people from overseas as well. So please do introduce yourself in the chat and we'll get started shortly. Fantastic. Welcome, everyone. Just another point of re-encouragement. Do introduce yourself in the chat. Thank you, Robin, for kicking us off. That's fantastic. And so great to see so many of you. All right, fantastic. My name is Julia Waite. I'm a project manager with Meat and Livestock Australia, and welcome to the first webinar in the sustainability series. This is a new program for us. It's where we showcase topics and research in our on-farm environment program. As I mentioned, we've got people joining us from not just Australia, but internationally. So I thought it might be worth mentioning a little bit about who Meat and Livestock Australia is and what we do. Thank you, Nahuel. So Meat and Livestock Australia is a service provider to the red meat industry, covering grass and grain-fed beef, lamb and goats. And we're tasked with ensuring their profitability, sustainability and global competitiveness. So we do this through investing in R&D, adoption and extension, and domestic and offshore marketing. But tonight and in this series at large is all about the R&D, and you've joined us here for cattle and timber. Can it work in Australian grazing systems? So we're going to hear from all different sides of this coin tonight. So starting off, we'll hear from Nahuel for a research perspective, and he'll be sharing some of the latest results from a co-funded project with MLA called Steak and Wood. We'll move through to the forestry extension and the timber service before finishing up with some reflections by Neil Reinke, a Queensland producer. Tonight's going to be really about questions as well. So you'll notice that your microphones are muted. However, please put your questions in the chat. Put them in as they come to you if you like, and our speakers can respond to them in the moment. But we'll also be tracking them and coming back to them at the end for a really good Q&A with all three of our speakers. So without further ado, I'd like to hand off to Nahuel to kick us off for the evening. Thanks, Nahuel.
Thanks, Julia, for the introduction. So good evening, everyone. So in this webinar, we are going to provide a quick overview of the research that we are doing on silvopastoral system under the Steak and Wood project here in Queensland and north of New South Wales. This project is jointly funded by Meat and Livestock Australia and DPI and involve an interdisciplinary team from various organizations, including UQ, University of Queensland, University of Sunshine Coast, Private Forest Service Queensland, Stanwell Corporation, timbers, beef producers as well. So silvopastoral system combine trees, pasture, and livestock on the same land and time. As you know, it is not a new concept. Has been adopted for centuries here in Queensland, and usually combines grazing in extensive woodlands, providing livestock shade and forage, and also giving landholders the opportunity to diversify income through the timber sales. However, we are now evaluating what we call modern silvopastoral system, which are different to the historical one because they have more holistic view. They are designing to optimize the joint production of the timber and beef production, while also focus on the profitability of the system. So these systems are productive, profitable, and sustainable. And doing that, not only we are aiming to have combined timber and beef, but also we also have co-benefit. Or for example, We increase the carbon sequestration, increase biodiversity, and improve animal welfare through provision of the shade. So this, as you can see here, an example of silvopastoral system in Queensland. So we are working with private native forests, also with hardwood species, but also can be adopted with softwood species. On the right-hand side is Pinus caribeaea in the far north Queensland. So this project, the Stakeable project, aims to quantify and validate the system in Australia and in Queensland mainly. And also the idea is to explore the opportunities for silvopastoral system as a pathway to help beef producers to become carbon neutral. So for doing that, we set up a series of experiments around Queensland and north of New South Wales across 13 sites, covering over 900 hectares of experiment. So we are working from Roehampton, Queensland, Roehampton to north of New South Wales, mainly in the coastal area, in areas that have more than 750 millimeter rainfall per year. So we are closely monitoring the tree, pasture, and livestock and soil interaction. For doing that, we set up over 135 permanent plots to evaluate the tree growth. We installed over 216 exclusion cages to evaluate the pasture productivity under different tree density as well. We took over 665 soil cores to evaluate, to have a baseline of the soil carbon, but also to characterize the soil. Due to the logistic and scale constraint, animal productivity is being directly measured in only 2 sites. We also have the PhD student working on biodiversity, focused on vertebrates and invertebrates. He's getting very good results, and he's comparing different land use, open pasture versus silvopastoral system versus remnant forest, and also a block of full of trees. So here is an example of the work that we are doing with the private native forest. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because Bill Schulke will talk about that. But here is an example of the forest, a spotted gum forest here in Queensland. As you can see, is overstocking with low tree growth because of the number of trees per hectare, but also a low pasture productivity. But applying silviculture, applying sustainable management, you can reduce the density, and you can increase the timber growth of the remaining trees, but also you can increase the pasture productivity as well. So it's a win-win situation for us. But I would like to talk about how we are working on the farm, how we are introducing trees on farm. At the moment, we can see that establishing trees on farm as like a block of planting hasn't been successful, and probably is not suitable for silvopastoral systems. So we are evaluating different planting configuration. As you can see, we are using alley planting with double rows of trees with alleys of 20 meters apart. In this case, it's origami planted 2 years ago with 267 trees per hectare. So we are aiming for this site has around 110 per hectare at the end of the rotation, which yes, we assume is going to be at 25 years of age. So doing that, why we are using alley planting configuration, because it provides good balance between trees and grass interaction, low cost of establishment, reduce the impact of pasture productivity due to the lack of thinning or pruning operation, and also allow for grazing in the alley immediately after planting. So we are using electric fence. The animal can be grazed between the alleys instead of waiting for this site to 2 or 4 years, so the tree can be big enough to support the grazing. So here is an example of the work that we are doing at Gayndah in Queensland, 250 millimeter rainfall per year. working very close with the animal science group. We have a long-term experiment evaluating open pasture versus silvopastoral system. We just finished the second year of evaluating animal productivity. We just start the third year, and this year we are going to have collars to evaluate the animal behavior of the as well. So for this site, we are aiming to have at the end of the rotation 100 stems per hectare. But if we can see for some reason a decline of pasture productivity, we are not going to hesitate to reduce the density as well. Because for silvopastoral system, what we want is high quality trees, but also high productivity of the grass as well, which means it's going to be a high productive beef production in this area. So how we are establishing trees on farm at the moment, what we are doing is we are using a ripper to 0.5 meter, cultivate with a small mounting plow. This can make the planting more easier and also improve the growth rate of the trees if the soil is compacted. Weed control is the most important management for improving early growth rate. So we need to be on top of that, a very good weed control. And we are using fertilizer as well with nitrogen and phosphorus in the early stage of the planting. So talking about the species that we are using, so from the long-term experiment, we know that very well what species work well and which not. So Sporigam has been one of the best species performing in Queensland. So when you are selecting the species, you need to thinking about what species can tolerate the worst extreme of the weather of the site. That means high temperature or low temperature, but also long drought period. Some of the advantages of the sport gum is the exceptional straight stem compared to other eucalyptus growing in here. The high drought tolerance, the improve of genetic arboromycin. We are getting very good result compared versus improved seedlings, and the rapid early growth rate as well. The disadvantage is they are susceptible to frost when they are young, susceptible to convallaria, spot blight in higher rainfall area, and also a salt blight. We are also evaluating Sporigam mixed with another species. The advantage as you are having a higher biodiversity because you are combining different species. We are in this site on the, as you can see on the photo, we are evaluating Sporigam with Gimpy mesmei, ironbark, blue gum, foil red gum, and gray gum as well. So 5 different species as well. The advantage we have a higher productivity if the mix is complementary, low risk for trialing new species, more resilient to interspecific competition, pests and diseases. As disadvantage, we can say that higher planting density may be needed to compensate for a high rate of no commercial trees, lower productivity if the mix includes lower growing species, and also we still we don't know very well what is the complementarity of this combination. We are evaluating other species as well. Hoop pine, in this case, working very well, but this species is going to take longer than 25 years for the rotation. We are expecting like 35-year rotation. The good thing about this species is you don't need any protection. The animal can be grazing as soon as you planted the trees, but you are going to expect probably a 20% of maybe trees that can be damaged because of the animals. We are also evaluating the western white gum or chinchilla white gum. Very slow growing, grow very well in soil with high clay content, like Bertosol or Sodosol. But after pruning this species, we are not recommending this species for timber production. So if you have a site with this kind of characteristic, probably you're better off probably don't stick with a species that is content for timber production. So we are protecting the trees using the alleys. We are using the alleys as soon as we finish the planting. On the left-hand side is an example of the fence that we are using is a semi-permanent fence with one wire. And on the right-hand side is a cheaper electric fence that has been used in another site as well. So we are removing the fence after 1 year and a half, allowing the animals doing the grazing. If, for example, you are working with other species such as pine, maybe you need to have longer time the electric fence. Well, I like to talk about the thinning and pruning. So it's in this on the left hand side is a side that we started with higher density over 400 stems per hectare, but at year 3 we reduced to 150 stems per hectare because we want to just concentrate in the best trees and do that at this year. We are thinning small trees, which is easy to thin them out. Also, they left a small amount of residual. Pruning is very important, mainly when you are working with very low density, because otherwise the taper of the tree could be different and can affect the quality as well. So it's very important to do pruning. So we did a pruning at year 1. It was a 4 pruning. At year 2, we did a pruning to up to 2 meters, and year 3, we are pruning up to 4.5 meters with using leathers and secateurs. So I think I'm going to hand over to Bill Schulke. That's everything. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Nahuel. Yes, Bill, over to you to share your slides. And don't forget, if you've got questions for a particular speaker, just drop them in as you think of them. We will definitely come back to them.
Okay, well, can you hear me, Julia?
Yes, I can.
Yep. Good, thank you. You're right. Yeah, well, welcome everyone, and thanks, Julia. Thanks, Nahuel. So obviously, the Steak and Wood project is looking at options for beef producers to incorporate trees and timber production into your grazing enterprise. So a fair bit of this evening, we'll be looking at plantation options. I want to just look at some options for managing the trees you already have. So I really want to sort of focus on the native forest and more of a focus on the silviculture that many of these stands require. So the herbarium tells us that about 78% of Queensland is used for beef production. Sorry, the ABARES tells us 78% of Queensland is used for beef production. The herbarium tells us that about 55% of Queensland is covered in trees. So of that 96 million hectares, about 52 million hectares is classified as forest. So I think there's this natural overlap for many beef producers. You are already managing treed landscapes. Now, of that 52 million hectares, only about 30% is privately owned, about 16 million hectares, but a lot of that is non-commercial forest and it is spread around the state. But if we head west, there's 25 million hectares west from Rockhampton out to the Carnarvons, back into the Downs and south of the border. We know that there's roughly about 10% of that, 22.3 million hectares, contains commercial, privately owned native forest. Now, one thing that's a little bit different with the hardwood industry in Queensland is that 60% of the sawlog that is processed annually in Queensland is sourced from this privately owned resource. And most of it is on grazing properties. Now, our forests produce, world-class durable products. We're talking about native forests that grow, they're adapted to the environment in which they grow. We know they respond positively to silviculture, but unfortunately, most probably aren't in an optimum productive state. So before we really start talking about the silviculture of these stands, there's probably two things we need to be aware of. So the first key feature is our forests tend to be dynamic. They do change with time. In the past, many of our grassy open forests were dominated by these large, bold trees with wide space trees with a grassy understory. Now, when we changed management, in this case, fire was excluded in Brahma State Forest to promote the cypress. But if we exclude fire for long periods of time, we actually start to change the forest structure. We're starting to alter the ecology of this site. We're certainly altering the hydrology and the nutrient cycling. So we tend to have impacts, particularly on fuel loads and the health of these forests. So we just need to be aware that our forests are dynamic. They do change with time. Now, the other key aspect is, particularly on land that has been sort of thinned and cleared for grazing in the past, we do have an ability to regenerate. So this is a property just inland from Bundaberg that we manage, probably been thinned out and logged over a 100-year period. Not all trees removed. Some good quality young trees have been left to grow into what are now good quality soil logs. We took over the management of this property a couple of years after that photo. We were wanting to promote the timber production, and we suspected that we might be able to manipulate this lignotuber pool, this regen pool. You see these little suckers that were kept at in that lignotuber phase through fire and grazing. So all we did was remove grazing for about 12 months and fire for a couple of years. So by 2018, we had a regen response from that lignotuber pool up into the sapling phase, where we were able to go in and thin that out to around 150 to 200 stems per hectare. So 6 or 7 years later, we have a really good quality stand of commercial timber coming on this site. This is plantation quality that didn't cost us anything to establish other than that destocking. So don't discount the ability of your native forest to regenerate, and you just need to be willing and able to tap in and take advantage of that. Okay, so look, I haven't got time to go into any detail about the silviculture, but I do want to focus on what I think are we'll just briefly cover what I think are the three most important aspects. So crown class, tree density, limiting basal area, and past management. So if we consider a typical native forest, we've got a range of species, range of age classes. We can clearly identify trees that have dominant crowns. So these are trees that, particularly in this sapling phase, get the jump on their siblings. Right? So they overtop their siblings. And those saplings that lose that race then are referred to as subdominant crowns. And it's the extreme crown shyness in these subdominant crowns that over time develop what are referred to as suppressed crowns. Now, Grimes and Pegg, a couple of researchers during the 1970s, looked at the impact of crown health on tree growth in our dry forests. And they come up with a scoring system. Don't worry too much about that. The key issue here is trees that score highly, that have healthy crowns, are growing significantly faster than those trees with poor crowns. So that makes sense. I mean, the crown is the photosynthetic engine room of the tree. Okay, the second key thing we need to be aware of, in many of these stands are regrowth stands. So if you extrapolate forward from that 3 photo sequence from the property inland of Bundaberg, eventually, in the absence of any management, that will hit limiting basal area. Okay, so basal area is just the sum of the cross-sectional area of all the trees in the stand, and limiting basal area is the point at which all growth starts to lock up. Now, those regrowth stands will self-thin to some extent, but we see 80, 100-year-old regrowth stands that haven't thinned beyond about 500 or 600 stems per hectare. So the net outcome there is even those best trees, even those good quality trees, are only half grown when you're hitting limiting basal areas. So what we want to do, if we want to optimise timber production, is try to manage our basal area across a harvest, thinning and growth cycle of between 5 and 15 square metres per hectare. And then thirdly, the key thing that really sort of limits production in our forests is the way in which they're logged. And traditionally, they've been high graded. So high grading is just single tree selection by the cutter, where the biggest, the most valuable trees are removed. Unfortunately, when you do a high grade harvest, what are you left with? You're left with a high proportion of defective and suppressed trees. And this is the rub with our eucalypts. Those suppressed trees don't respond to release, righto? They've lost their ability to respond. So once they're shot, they're shot. Okay, so we want to focus our management decisions on crown health. We want to avoid limiting basal area, and we want to change our harvest regime away from high grading. Okay, so this is A typical scenario in many of our native forests, it's too many trees. We're hitting limited base areas, some good quality trees, but just very slow growth rates. I'll let you make comments about the ecological value and the fuel loads and the grazing value on that landscape. But what we're keen on is a silvicultural reset. So we come in and paint mark trees we want to keep, based primarily on crown health, but also form and spacing. We then harvest any trees that aren't marked that we can get a product out of. We then treat out of the stand all those trees that are unmarked that we can't get a product. Now that does look messy, I admit that. But what you've got to do is come back in a couple of years. And invariably what we see is because we've retained trees with dominant crowns, they do respond to that release. So that flush of crown growth is now driving tree growth. These trees, individual trees, are growing at in excess of 1 centimetre per year, whereas previously they were growing at 1 or 2 millimetres. And you can make comments about the grazing value. This is a grassy open forest again, so you can talk about ecological value. And so just from an economic point of view, good management compared with high grading. We're keeping better quality trees, so they're more valuable when we harvest them, and they're growing faster, so they're ready for harvest sooner. So we get a fourfold improvement by just managing our forests correctly. And if we extrapolate that across our forest estate, just a quarter of our privately owned native forest estate well managed, we would have a sustainable log yield of 600,000 cubic metres per annum. Okay, so that's 2 to 3 times what we're currently processing from both the private and state resource. Okay, so Julia, I think I'm getting close to time here, but just really briefly.
Keep going. You've got 5.
Most landowners in Queensland sort of understand this need to get the tree grass balance right. Yeah? And there's a reason for that. And I haven't got time to go into the positive benefits of trees in the landscape, and there's plenty of those. But generally speaking, as tree density increases, so basal area down here on the x-axis, your average annual grass production tends to decline. Okay? Now, it does vary between forest type and climate zone. So, I mean, if you're really focused on grazing, don't keep trees or keep them at low densities. You probably don't want to operate down this end because you're not making any money out of your trees and you're not making much money out of your grazing enterprise. But across that harvest, thinning and growth cycle of 5 to 15 square metres per hectare, you can see that our grazing carrying capacity will vary as tree density increases. It will then increase as we harvest and thin. But our carrying capacity is always better than if we compared with high grading unmanaged stands. And so if you look at broadly at the economics of that, if it's about cattle, don't have trees or have them in low density, because trees will start to impact on your grass production, your carrying capacity, and your economics. But just consider that even when you take into account the costs of treating these stands and managing them, the money you forego by having trees in the system is more than compensated for by the value of the tree that you harvest. Okay, so I think this is a laydown misere for regulated veg. I mean, we should be seeing more landowners sort of managing their forest to improve the timber production, but you will also, marginally improve your cattle carrying capacity. High grading, I think, is pretty much a waste of time. Okay, so a lot of forest in Queensland, and they are dynamic and they do regenerate naturally. Most tend to be, overstocked, and I think they do have some issues with particularly fire risk. Crown health, limiting basal area, and high grading choke forest productivity. So if we want to improve productivity in these stands, we need to fix primarily those 3 aspects of management. And when we do that, we certainly can get, a significant improvement in the value of the production out of these stands. But I think they also help to rehabilitate these forests. And going right back to that first slide, I mean, this resource is on land that's primarily used for grazing. And particularly in freehold country, the ownership of that tree transferred from the state to you, the landowner. So it's an asset. Start thinking of these trees as assets rather than a liability. But all assets, I think, need to earn their keep. Okay, so I think there is a great potential for where we've got commercial species growing on these grazing landscapes. It just comes down to being willing to invest in the treatment of them. And that's me, Julia.
Bill took my challenge on time and did a fantastic job. I've personally got a question for you, Bill. Of the two, could you sort of just talk to the sort of key markets that Australian timber are going into, be that poles or pulp? Can you just talk a bit about that?
Well, certainly the majority of our hardwood logs are sawn up into feature grade. Flooring and decking are big markets. I guess we've got some niche markets, sort of step treads and stringers, so bigger section timber. Energy Queensland, I think, have about 1.6 million poles in their distribution network in Queensland, majority of which are hardwood poles. So yeah, they're the broad markets. We've got a few, some veneer logs, bridge girders. There are other markets, and we're seeing some emerging markets for lower, salvage grade landscape material. So there is a wide range of products, and I think that will continue to grow. We've just got to bear in mind that we are a net importer of hardwood product into Queensland.
Neil, the floor is yours if you wanted to come off mute and you can speak to your reflections.
Hear me now?
Gotcha.
Rightio, so I'll just introduce myself. I'm Neil Reinke. I'm an ex-forester, so I've done 20 years with DAF Forest Products in plantation and in native forest management, but I've also had a background running my own cattle business, and subsequently last 5 years have been purely doing cattle. And I was lucky enough, we're actually participating in the Steak and Wood project and have trials on our place, and I was a representative for MLA on the recent trip to South America. So we've done 3 countries, Paraguay, Uruguay and Argentina. So we travelled about 3,600 kilometres, looked at 10 silvopasture enterprises, and we've done 3 sawmill tours. Yep, we can next slide. So what did we see there? What I saw was a great example of balancing tree and grass production, and it was that stacking of profitable enterprises. Next slide.
I can go one more if it's not what you expected.
No, that's all right. I've just got something covering my screen. I'm just going to try it. There we go. Got rid of it. So we saw a great example of growing timber and livestock together, and it makes sense when you see it done properly. So the beauty over there is they've been doing these silvopasture systems with plantation for about between 25 and 30 years. So they've had a lot of experience. Some of them are on their second and third rotations now. Next slide. And one of the key take-homes, I guess, I learned, having a forestry background, was less is more. So usually in a plantation situation, we have more trees, but practically no grass, and a bit like what Bill was showing in the native forest. But in the silvopasture systems, having less trees means more grass, and it's that balancing act. They've got that balance quite well. Next slide. Rightio. So another kind of take-home message for me with the silvopasture is that you can grow trees and grass when you get that spacing and density right. We saw really good examples on all our sites of how well-managed grass can be grown in a forest situation. Next slide. just thought I'd show you, this is a bit of an example of a well-managed silvopasture, and this was in Paraguay. So this was pruning up to 11 metres. So some of these trees are reaching heights of 30 to 40 metres. Next slide. Here's a 10-year-old silvopasture plantation. This was actually ready to be harvested, and you can see like it's got a pretty big stocking density. I think that was about 160 stems per hectare, but beautiful from a beef production point of view. Very good standard grass. So I'm going to talk about some of the advantages I saw with the silvopasture systems. Let's go to the next slide. So one thing we really did observe doing that 3,600 kilometres is when we got to those silvopasture systems was how healthy the pastures were and the biodiversity that was happening. There's definitely increased grass health, and you can tell on some of the photos the colour of the grass versus some of the traditional grazing areas, you know, because we've got that nutrient cycling in these stands. A big thing with that, we were lucky enough that a lot of the producers opened their books up and were quite happy to show their figures. And one of the interesting things that I found was that the profitability of the silvopasture system. So traditionally, like a set stock grazing operation is making about $80 a hectare, a more intensive grazing operation about $200 a hectare. But in those silvopasture systems, they were making in excess of $400 per hectare. So they were doubling their productivity. The other thing I was just going to say is that there's also some, succession opportunities. I think in Australia with the ability to plant some of these things with a longer term goal when we do succession, it's a way of providing cash flow as one family exits. So, and there was also a lot of family investment into the silvopasture systems. Next slide. The spreading of risk. Having those two income streams. So a lot of producers actually said when cattle prices were high and timber prices usually were the opposite, but when they had the kind of cattle slump and the cattle prices were low, the timber prices were high. So it just gives them the flexibility that they spread that risk in their business. Weight gain. So it'd be interesting to see, and Nahuel's doing some work. So we actually got to observe an OptiWeigh, and they were trialling that in their silvopasture systems to see on weight gain. But one thing producers were saying is for calving, they had a lower mortality rate when they were calving out in the silvopasture systems because of the cover and I guess the animal welfare, especially when we got to the southern areas where it got quite cold. They also said that their mating percentage was increased when they were joining their maiden heifers in the silvopasture systems. So there's also some of those, things to consider that we may not, be taking into account. Next slide. They do grow a yabba mate over there. So one thing they talked about was where they'd grown yabba mate for quite a lot of years, the land got quite degraded and become very poor, even grazing land. But under the silvopasture systems, what they found is that land improved to the point where they could actually go back to farming. So quite a great way to, improve degraded soil. And I think also possibly, help with drought resilience. So another thing producers talked about was the better use of equipment and labour. So trying to justify, owning a new tractor when you're just on a beef operation was quite hard. But when you had a silvopasture system, you had enough work for that machinery. They also had full-time work then for their labour staff. So, they could put them into the cattle work, but then also bring them back when they didn't have to do cattle work into the plantation. So it kind of allowed that flexibility of labour. So that's definitely an advantage. Next slide. So some of the hurdles, I guess, I'll second rotation stumps. So the pine stumps, 3 years, they kind of disappear, but the hardwood stumps, so they have things where they're cutting them down low or obviously removing those stumps, which is obviously a cost. Harvesting residue and undergrowth. So they talked about some of the problems that they can have with the residue, but also we did observe some issues with undergrowth, and possibly could be an issue, especially in Queensland with lantana and things like that. But they actually were using chopper rollers and had some pretty good techniques to manage that. And Nahuel talked about the production loss. So there's that time lag from when we plant the trees till the trees are big enough for the stock to go in there. So that's something to consider. Did talk to them about, the possibility, like in some of their better sites, whether they could do hay and silage, and also the use of electronic collars. So I see an issue probably in Australia is our workforce, having enough workforce, because there is quite a lot of labour with the pruning. And definitely establishment investment costs that early on, extra equipment, and just the initial cost of getting that before we actually get your first payday or first harvest. Another issue I guess we've got in Australia is market uncertainty and industry change. So their industry over there has done a great job in using a very different product to what they were used to. So for Australia, that's definitely something, we've got to get some markets established for this, because it's going to go away from traditional, large sawn sections and into a totally different product. Next slide. So we'll just do a bit of a can it work in Australia? I think we've definitely got the rainfall, the climate and the soil is matched. We definitely, we've got to have some proximity to sawmills, and we've definitely got that on our coastal band. One thing I definitely saw over there is that it is implemented by farmers and the timber industry. So no real government involvement, and it works quite well when farmers run the business. Possibly one of the things that we did see in Uruguay was there was definitely some early investment and taxation breaks in the early stage, and Uruguay was definitely far advanced. You could see that early government assistance in the tax breaks helped that, helped that industry get established a lot quicker, and it's probably like 10 or 15 years advanced compared to Argentina. I'll just quickly, this is just on our property, just to show you traditional plantation of silvopasture. So for me, it's a no-brainer. It definitely works here. And we'll just finish the last slide, which will be just a bit of a silvopasture roundup. So one of the things, Argentina, Uruguay and Paraguay have adopted a very good balance between beef production and timber growing. You take my hats off, they're 20, 30 years advanced on Australia. Their farmers adopting silvopasture appear to be more profitable. So you could see that just in the equipment and how they were running versus, as we're driving through the country to just traditional grazing only. To me, there were added benefits using silvopasture into a beef enterprise, including there was a lot of direct and, as I've mentioned, direct and indirect benefits. Silvopasture systems provide more employment and diversity in work and use of resources, and it's something I think we need to take into account, that the beef industry doesn't provide a lot of employment. So this could actually make agriculture in Australia, something to make more employment. There's definitely major difference in growth rates, which is something I haven't mentioned. So from seedlings compared to their hybrids, so they've done a lot of work in their genetics, just like we do with their cattle with breeding. Their genetics, like they were getting 6-7 centimetre growth differences in their hybrids. So we definitely have got a lot. We're a long way behind here in Australia. And to me, silvopasture has evolved to meet the timber industry, like timber requirements, and I guess processing has adopted to change of raw material. So that's a big thing, which I think we'll have to do here in Australia as well. So yeah, that's me. It was a great tour and definitely eye-opening to what we can do here in Australia.
Brilliant. Thank you, Neil. Thanks to all our speakers. If you've got a question, put it in the chat or raise your hand. We might have the ability to do some verbal questions. But I've got a question from Tyrone, directed at you, Neil, but any of the other speakers jump in. Any suggestions for grass species for that understory growth, that pasture base under the trees for northern New South Wales or Queensland that you could recommend?
Yes, I definitely could. So a big grass they were using over there was bracharia or like your signal type grasses. I definitely think green panic, any of those shade tolerant grasses do exceptionally well. So those softer type grasses. But the important thing is getting that alley or that spacing, and like Bill talked about, that density right.
Bill or no? Yeah, Nahuel, you've come off.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with Neil. So I recommend. Yeah, we saw Urocloa brisanta, but most important for the path selecting a pasture is going to have a very good reduce the light competition. So usually we are working with C4 species, so this species need light. So if we provide light, that pasture will perform well. Otherwise, we are going to reduce the productivity of the grass.
Just a quick one, I guess, with respect to pasture options for the native forest situation. Most of our native forests are growing on fairly on the poorer land types, so they're generally lower fertility. So you just got to be careful that you don't plant species that have high nutrient demands. So certainly this coastal, subcoastal area, yeah, I agree. The sort of the granite country, signal grass is, the brachiareas, well, we call them now. They're very suitable. The other one to really consider though in your native forest, where you really are looking at a native pasture understory, is the potential for some legume augmentation as well. So the stylos, etc. Are definitely options.
Fantastic. We had another question about how, the challenge of stumps. How were the South American silvopastoralists dealing with those? Is that something we can do here?
Yep. So you can see in one of the photos that I provided, they've actually where they've cut those stumps down lower, like so right at ground level, so they can get equipment and quad bikes and things across them. And then the other option is you actually have to physically remove those stumps. But most of them had what they were doing in that silvopasture system was, because it's an alley planting, they were actually just moving their alleys when they come back to second rotation. They were just shifting sideways 5 metres and leaving those stumps cut off at ground level and letting them decompose naturally. You've got to remember, compared to a native forest stump, the durability isn't near the same as, because they're growing a lot quicker, so they will decompose and rot down a lot quicker than the native forest stumps.
Great. If anyone would prefer to ask their question verbally, please use the raise your hand function. We'll do our best to make that run smoothly and take you off mute. But I do believe there was one more question that I saw directed for Bill about getting started. And I know you've got some resources through the Private Native Forest Service, but just in general, Bill, how do people find out more it's a whole new game if they're not already doing this. So where can they get?
Well,
some...
certainly, yeah. So certainly the starting point, if it's regulated veg, which 70% of it is, do a property vegetation report and the detailed one, which will then give you your regional ecosystems. Under the Vegetation Management Act in the regulated veg, you can harvest and you can thin, you can manage those things, but you've got to do it according to a code of practice, and you need to notify the department. So you will need to. There is a list there of regional ecosystem that you have to that you can apply it to. So that'll be a starting point. If you're not sure what your veg status is and what your regional ecosystems are, that's a starting point. And then just chase up a bit of information. So certainly PFSQ website's got some handy tools, YouTube clips, etc. And I'm sure, on the Future Beef website as well, Nahuel would have there'd be some material coming out of this project.
And there you've got counterparts in other states as well, don't you, Bill? It's for the folks dialing in from other parts of the country.
I think it's a bit of an issue. Like the native forest, the privately owned native forest management is. Yeah, it's not a big deal. This is the difference in Queensland, that 60% of the hardwood being sourced from your native forest. There is a bit of a demand for landowners to get information, whereas in the other states, the private resource tends to be a minor component of the total throughput. There were a range of private forestry development committees. Most of those have folded. PFSQ was one. We're still active. I think there's some timber hub activity. So certainly northeast New South Wales, central New South Wales. So probably that'd be a starting point. There are some timber hubs active, and we've got the southeast and the North Queensland hub active as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And there's a few other state-by-state initiatives popping up for specific kinds of tree planting. There's also a federal government subsidy at the moment for establishing new plantations. I've just popped the link in there, but in the recap email, we'll include some other links of opportunities there for folks who've registered. Any other questions while we've got our three speakers in the room? Or anything else the speakers would like to add? I was very a taskmaster with your timekeeping, and you've been fabulous. Great, Martin and Lewis. I'll see if I can unmute you. You should be able to. Oh, sorry, Courtney. We reversed each other's. There you go. You should be able to unmute now, Martin.
There we go.
Beauty. Yeah, we've got you.
Oh, just curious. With that South American expedition, what were the main species that were planted and those that were recorded in that presentation there? Just curious what those were.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to remember, Nahuel. They were,
we saw different species. For example, in Paraguay, we saw eucalyptus hybrids, and then grandis with Uro grandis, and in Argentina, we saw most of the plantation were Eucalyptus grandis, and we saw pine plantation, and the pine plantation was the hybrid pine. This Pinus eliotis crossing with Caribbea pine. And then, yes, in Uruguay, we saw hybrid and grandis again.
Is it possible to get some of those hybrid eucalypts in Australia? Because you were saying they had quite a big increase in production.
Yeah, to give you an idea of the difference in production, there was a stand, there was 6 years difference, and there was 1 centimetre difference in the size of the trees. So those those 6-year-old younger hybrid trees were 1 centimetre under those seedling trees. That's just how good those genetics were. The risk with a hybrid, they're all a clone of each other. So if it ever gets a disease, the problem is you could, effectively lose your whole plantation. So that is one catch by doing clonal, isn't it, Nahuel?
Yeah, no, the thing is with the eucalyptus here in Australia, we have a lot of pests and disease. So so improve eucalyptus grande from overseas that won't have any defense for the pests, so we are going to fail. No, so we need to have something locally developed instead of have something bring something from overseas. We already have that made that mistake before, so we are not going to make another one. But definitely we need to work in improve our genetic, the local provenance, and start working on crossing as well.
Yeah.
So we saw as well a sporigam planted over there. They were providing clonal sporigam, and they have the same issues that we have here in the nursery because of the successful rate. It was very low, like 30% successful rate at the nursery, but they didn't have any issue with the other clones.
Fantastic. I've got one question in the chat from Shuna. If you're not going to use the trees for timber harvesting, what are your suggestions for tree types, specifically for shade or fodder? And she throws in the bonus if they are suitable to Tasmania. I'm challenging the Queensland research team and the forestry team. Think outside the box.
If I have to suggest something, yes, you need to see what is growing locally and see what is going to be the best option for that side. The same thing for the grass. Someone asked what is going to be the best grass for the silvopastoral system. Again, you need to see your site and select the species of the grass based on your environment, and the same thing with the trees. Focus on your environment, the soil condition, the temperature, the rainfall. You are going to select your trees, and also depending of your aim as well. And also, I like to. I don't know if you can see my screen, but I like to thanks to everybody who is working and has been working in the Stekemot project, mainly the beef producer and timber producer involved in this activity. Also, I have a link as well for additional information about the Stekemot project.
Thanks, Nahuel. Yeah, we'll be sending a recap with the recording, as well as some resources that were shared today, all there in one spot for you. Okay, if there isn't any more burning questions, speak now, forever hold your peace. Although the speakers, I'm sure, will be happy to if you reach out to them after the session. But thank you everyone for coming to our first ever Sustainability Series webinar. This is just the beginning. So as part of our endeavour to showcase more of our research and extension, we'll be running more of those with just some 2 dates there for you upcoming. Beck and Kai, it better be an amazing question. Off you go. You should be able to unmute and you finish us up. You're able to come off, Beck and Kai. If you're not able to, Beck, just drop it in the chat and we'll make sure you get an answer to your question. Unfortunately, we can't hear you, so do write it in the chat and I'll get you an answer. But thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you to our speakers. Good night.